10 years ago, the electric car market and the electric car game essentially was very different compared to how it is today. And look no further than BMW to prove my point. Nowadays, BMW has the i4, which is just an electric version of the 4 Series Grand Coupe. They have an i5, the electric version of the 5 Series, and even an i7, the electric version of the 7 Series. It works, it makes sense, they look exactly the same as the gas cars, and they come with all the electric car benefits like instant acceleration, quietness, and bragging to people who really couldn't care less. But 10 years ago, BMW had the i3, and no, it's not an electric version of the 3 Series. It couldn't be less 3 Series if it tried, except for the fact that it is rear-wheel drive, and there is a 3 in the name. That is literally the only similarities this had with a 3 Series back in the day. Case in point, carbon tub. This i3, in order to meet a weight target, pretty sure that was their goal. It is made purely out of carbon fiber, which is something that you don't see except for in like Bugattis, high-end supercars, for instance. But now you can have a carbon tub on a $12,000 used car with 170 horsepower. But it helped the i3 meet a weight target, which was a lighter weight type of electric vehicle. Electric vehicles have batteries and a lot of electrical components that are very heavy. So despite all of that underneath in the i3, this only weighed just a smidge over 3,000 pounds with the optional range extender gasoline generator that is hidden somewhere in there. If you didn't go for that, it actually weighed less than 3,000 pounds. So for an electric car, that's pretty cool. And nowadays you have Hummer EVs driving around that weigh like 9,000 pounds. 3 of these things. Let's take a review type tour around this car, shall we, fellas? All right, before we get into the i3 and experience its comfort and its luxurious interior, let's talk key first. I wasn't actually expecting this, but this key is like completely different than any other BMW key you've seen. It's really wide and flat, and seems to only have a button to open the front trunk, not the actual like trunk back there that you're going to be using 100% of the time. No, they thought that you would actually need to get to your tire changing, tire repair kits up in front more, so it would seem that I only have a button for that. Kind of interesting. Wouldn't normally mention it, but I just wasn't expecting it to be completely different from a standard BMW key of the day. I mean, they really thought that it would make sense to develop a whole different type of key just for the i3. It's whatever. This is the interesting part of the i3, see? You've got a front door, as normal, pillarless, which is kind of cool, I guess. But you also have, if you didn't know, a rear door, and it's rear facing. So this is a thing that they did, meaning there is more room to climb into the back seat, easier to get into the interior as a whole, and it exposes a lot of the carbon tub on the sills and up on the wheel arches that you can look at and tell all your friends. If you buy a car that looks like this, you probably won't have friends anymore. So that's your last saving grace to try to keep your friends around before they run away screaming. It's worth noting that Mazda has pretty much blatantly copied the i3's design with their new MX-30, which I should add has no more range. Also offers a range extender, which is a rotary. In that application, a rotary doesn't make sense. It has these doors. It has an alternative weird interior. Mazda was copying BMW's homework on the one car that BMW makes that Mazda shouldn't have copied. So just like with every car ever, there's always going to be some competition within the market. But back then, the electric car market was quite diluted. There wasn't a lot to choose from. Now the BMW i3 actually seemed to sell quite well. You see them everywhere these days, and they only stopped making them like 5 minutes ago. So these were produced and sold so late that they were almost on the market at the same time as the i4, which again is a much more conventional car. This is just weird. Let's go over boring practicality type stuff with the trunk, which won't open because this car hates me. So I've got one button for the back. Let's have a look. And you find not the largest of cargo areas. that comes off as well. By design, it's not broken. So inside you have quite a small cargo area. Not that much to talk about. There's a couple straps on either side. Is there storage underneath? No, because I believe that's where your range extender lies. So maybe on the standard one without the range extender, there is some storage underneath here, but I believe that is actually where it is. So technically this is a rear-engined, rear-wheel drive BMW. That's what you're gonna be telling hot girls at parties. But don't expect them to come home with you when they see what you actually showed up in. So yeah, underneath there is I believe it's a 2-cylinder range extender motor. It boosts the range of this car from a maximum of around 70 to 80 miles all the way to something like 150 miles. So back then, this was really the only option if you plan to actually use one of these things every day. And I don't know. I honestly think that range extender motors on electric cars, it's just admitting that your electric car isn't good enough and isn't useful enough on a day-to-day basis. Range extender motors basically don't exist anymore. They're in a couple pathetic electric cars that are on the market now. Largely you don't see them, but in the i3, it made it more usable for everyday purposes. So pretty much all of these that you'll see have the range extender because it was a no-brainer back in the day, really. These are 155 width tires, which means to people that don't understand that I can take my hand and fit it around the tire itself. Any narrower and these would pass as space saver wheels. These are just unbelievably narrow, and they need to be because less width in the tire means less rolling resistance, which means it can use less energy to move itself along. And in my limited experience with this car, you don't really notice how narrow the tires truly are. They don't seem to have much less grip than what you'd expect, and it actually steers quite quick. But yeah, these are probably the most narrow tires I've ever seen on any car, especially any BMW. Also, you may notice that there are 2 separate fuel doors on this particular i3, and once again, that's because it has that range extender back there. Up front, it would seem that this is where you top off the range extender gasoline generator, in case anybody needed to know about this. And back here is where you plug it in. And yes, because this is a 10-year-old electric car, it's one of those electric cars that takes several hours to charge. I believe the fastest charging was something like 18 or 20 miles per hour, which sounds pretty bad, and then you realize that it only had about 70, 80 miles of range anyways, so not that big of a deal, but it was slow charging back in the day, and that affected livability with these types of cars. Now you have supercharging, you can plug in your car at home overnight, so it's not as big of a problem, but it's still much less convenient than just topping her up at the gas station. So moving on from the obvious electric car lore, we have the interior, which is the Lodge interior on this i3. The i3 came in 4 interior options. Let me make sure I get this right. First one, the base level, had wood piping on the seats and basically cloth upholstery, and it was called the Atelier, that. And then there was the loft, which had some more luxury touches like faux leather interior and looked a little bit nicer. And then you could step up to the Lodge, which had beautiful eucalyptus wood on the dashboard. It had silver trim on the steering wheel. It had seats that were partial leather and partially wool, which is kind of weird. But if you wanted the full luxury experience, you could step up to the Suite interior, which had extra leather, some really nice floor mats. That's the one that you really wanted if you wanted your i3 to rival something like a Rolls-Royce. Maybe wasn't that nice. So I think it's time we go through interior comfort a bit more. So let's start back here. Now, even though this is a very short rear door, because it opens rearwards, that means it's got a lot more room than you'd expect for climbing in back here. And when you get back here, you discover that there is, for a tall person like me, 6'3", with a driver's seat in my driving position, there's really not that much room back here. I'm only able to not be chronically uncomfortable right now by man spreading, which would affect my Starbucks latte that I have in the center here, which is a cup holder arrangement that's just imprinted into the seat rest, which is a little weird. One thing that's worth noting is that yes, this rear door only opens if the front door is open. So if there's people up front, which there's bound to be if you're driving around in the car, you have to wait until the person in front of you gets out in order to open the door yourself. So yeah, you have to wait for the person in front of you to get out of the car before you get out, and that's kind of annoying. I see this lever here. Oh, okay. So there's a lever basically in the headrest of the front seat, and that's what you use to push the front seat in front of you forwards so that you can get back here even easier. But as I've proven, it's not that hard to squeeze yourself back here, even if you're not moving this front seat, because of the rearward opening rear door situation. Up front in the BMW i3, we find this is one of the most bizarre, strange BMW interiors they ever did, maybe the most. For instance, the iDrive screen up there, older version of iDrive, we'll get to it in a second, it's floating. It's got all this design to it, this leather, probably fake leather, wraps around the side of the air vent over there by the door, comes up and acts as sort of a post for the screen, which looks really cool. I always loved the fact that this whole central climate and radio control unit area was basically like the standard BMW climate control radio control thing, but it was flipped upside down. That's what it looks like. These vents look like they're straight out of something like a Z4, and they're upside down. All the controls are basically flipped on top of each other where you'd expect. So the radio presets, buttons, things like that are on top, and then climate is below that. That being said, it's basically just standard BMW climate stuff from the time. There's nothing special about it. You do have heated seats up here, which is nice to have. Moving down, you have a completely open floor area down here because it's an electric only car. So like the new iX, the whole floor is open. You don't need transmission tunnel, drive shafts, things like that going through here because everything is back there. Up here you have not one, but two cup holders. They thought to include that, which is very nice. You have your iDrive control back here and your drive modes, which are Comfort, Eco Pro, and Eco Pro Plus, which is maximum range without climate control and with limit of 56 miles per hour. So if you want to be completely, utterly miserable, but make it to your destination, that's what you use, Eco Pro Plus mode. And when you turn that on, you get a little light up here that shines in blue, Eco Pro Plus. So your passengers will look at that and understand why the car is driving so slowly and why there is no climate, no air conditioning at all coming out of the vents, and why it's steaming up, and why they should have hung out with somebody who had a proper BMW and not somebody who's willing to put up with all of this. So let's go back out of that into comfort mode, because that's as sporty as things get, I suppose. There's no sport mode in this car. A little bit of storage down there, not that interesting. Also more storage in here. I'm sure it could fit your iPhone 4S back in the day. Still fits modern phones, which is kind of nice. They actually really thought to the future with that one. They really did think to the future, or so they thought, about the style and experience of this car. They made it look like a car from the future. That was their goal, and I'm glad that cars from the future now don't look like this. When we talk about materials, the seats are trimmed with leather and wool. You've got eucalyptus wood on the dashboard, which actually looks very beautiful, and all these composite recycled materials on the door panel. One of my favorite things about the i3, except for its design and its whole ethos and the suicide doors, was the interior materials. I always thought it was a really cool place to be in here. A lot of interesting, weird materials being used, and everything about it was just unusual. Right in front of me, I have a really busy driving screen. I've got my speed, my charge, my power, trip, how much range I have on the battery, how much range I have on the generator, and I'm facing a 2-spoke white steering wheel, which is interesting. It's a weird steering wheel. It fits well in your hand, and because this is the lounge interior, it's trimmed in beautiful silver, which is, I didn't notice until I looked it up. Let's talk real quick about this shifter situation, which is completely unlike any other car I've ever seen before, which is sort of a theme with the i3. It's mounted on this stump basically coming off the steering column, and it works back to front. You'd expect, given BMWs nowadays, that drive would be pulling this towards you, but that's reverse. Pushing it away from you is actually drive. Park is on top, and the start-stop button in its very worn out state is right there. When I first got in this car, it took me probably 5 minutes to find the start-stop button. I just could not find it anywhere, and it ended up being there. I'm all looking in the center console, looking in every storage area, looking down here for the start button. I couldn't find it. Let's talk about this iDrive, which is BMW's older iDrive from the early to mid 2010s. Not that special. It just has random menus to go through, like your radio, telephone. It's not that special at all. It's just basically what you'd expect from an infotainment system back in the day. But given what I'd expect from an infotainment system from 10 years ago, it's quite a large screen, and it's very crisp and bright and looks actually really good. Because it's an i3, you've got some extra settings in here, like your range extender. You can set it to hold the state of charge and it'll kick on immediately. You can also control your charging, your departure time, but this infotainment system is really nothing special. Just got a couple little extra i3 touches to it. So yeah, it's a weird interior, but if you're used to BMWs, it doesn't take that long to get used to. You just got to get used to this weird shifter situation, how the windshield is 800 miles away from you, and this really busy screen up here. But it's not too bad from the front seat perspective. It's quite comfortable, got good materials. So yeah, I think it's time that we take this car out on the road and experience how it drives. Driving the i3, I have to admit that this has always been a guilty pleasure car for me. I don't know why, but ever since the i3 came out, I've really wanted one. I've at least wanted to experience one, because I think most of it has to do with this insane, weird interior and all of its weird but cool materials that it uses, and the styling on the outside. Yes, the styling is different. We'll say different, will be nice. But I honestly kind of like the styling. It's their 2014 take on what city cars of the future looked like. And it's always cool when a car manufacturer puts out a car that looks like a concept car. Ooh, yeah. Got a little bit of face to it. The design of this car, I think, is really reminiscent of the BMW E1 concept of the early 1990s, which basically looked like if an E36 3 Series and a BMW i3 got together, too many Wiener Schnitzels, and then 9 months later, this popped out. That's basically what it looks like. And I think the i3 is definitely reminiscent of that old E1 concept. They look very similar. Bump. I will say one complaint that I have with the i3 is the ride quality is just really incredibly stiff. Part of that could be the fact that the tires are just have no give in them at all. I can't imagine they'd help for comfort that much, but this car is a very stiff ride, and I wouldn't generally expect that from a city car type, but not the biggest deal. It's not horrible. I've got basically one pedal driving here. It's got really good regenerative braking. All right, let's floor it here. Ooh, 175 horsepower, something like that. Between 170 and 180 horsepower. It's got that instant acceleration for sure. You put your foot down and it takes off like a rocket ship, but not a very fast rocket ship. I've driven electric cars that were much quicker than this, but apparently this had a really impressive 0 to 40 mile per hour time back in the day when it first came out. And I don't doubt that at all. But considering how much quicker electric cars are now, it's interesting to look back. But it still has that same instant power delivery. Oh yeah, it's got some power. It's not fast by any means at all. It really isn't. And honestly, it doesn't handle too badly. It's pretty fun to drive. It's impressive that they made a car that looks like this, that is this athletic. It's got more acceleration and power than you'd expect. The steering is just unbelievably quick. And in terms of like body roll and body motion, there isn't that much, and part of that is because the batteries are all down in the floor, so it's a lower center of gravity, just like every electric car. Compared to the competition, this kind of sat in a weird middle space. It had more power than a Nissan Leaf, but was more expensive. It had less range than a Tesla Model S, but was much cheaper, but was also much less powerful. And this was, between the three of them, this was the weirdest, easily. But it's still true to that BMW heritage with rear-wheel drive. It's got a rear motor back there powering the rear wheels, so you get that nice, satisfying getting pushed out of a turn feel that you do from BMW, what you'd expect from BMW. But this isn't a BMW that I think you'd want to be seen in, looking like a complete dork driving around. So with that, I'm going to end that video there. Hope everybody enjoyed. Like, subscribe, do all the normal YouTube stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.